What a field day for the heat down there. 1,000 people in the street, singing songs and they carry inside. Mostly saying hooray for our side. There's battle lines being drawn. Nobody's right if everybody wrong. Young people speak in their mind, getting so much resistance from behind. We got to stop, children, what's that sound? Everybody looks, it's going down.
This is Lauren Steiner from the Robust Opposition doing a special edition of the Robust Opposition because we have something very special that we need to oppose. And that is the DWP plan to invest billions of dollars in aging, dirty gas plants. And we would like to get them to invest in clean energy instead. So what we have here today is we have a round table with 4 speakers, and then we're going to have a strategy session. And right here we have Tom Pike, and Tom is with the Sunrise Movement. He is also working for Lorraine Lundquist, who is the Green candidate for City Council. Right here is Jack Eidt, who is with 350 SoCal Climate Action Coalition, a group that he and I helped to found in 2013 after the largest climate rally ever in Los Angeles. Here is Jim Walsh, who is with Food and Water Watch. And Food and Water Watch is a fantastic organization. I've been organizing with them ever since 2012 when I found out what fracking was, and I have not stopped since. And Jim has a proposal to how we get to 100% green energy, and he's going to be explaining that. And finally, last but not least, of course, is Aura Vasquez, who is the hero of our show, because Aura, who is also involved with the SoCal Climate Action Coalition founding, she was an organizer with the Beyond Coal campaign, and unfortunately, LA did get off coal, but we got onto fracked gas. So now the next evolution of that is to get off of fracked gas and onto clean energy. Aura was appointed by Mayor Garcetti to the board of the Department of Water and Power, and that is our municipally owned power agency. So as we are starting a campaign across the state to break up PG&E, take over their assets, and have either public power or community choice energy instead, we have to remember that even public power agencies can make the wrong choices unless we pressure them. So that's why we have Aura Vasquez, appointed by Mayor Garcetti to the board, and I'll bet when he appointed her, he didn't realize what a strong advocate of clean energy she would be, because when the consultants to the DWP recommended that we invest billions of dollars in aging gas plants, Aura was the only one of 5 members to say no. And that is what started off this movement today to pressure public officials, because as we know, they don't do anything unless we pressure them to do it. So that's what started this little gathering today. And without any further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, who is Jack Eidt, as I previously mentioned, from SoCal 350 Climate Action. And he's going to give a little bit of a history of our movement to go green here in Los Angeles.
350.org has been working as a coalition. We started with fighting tar sands, and in 2011 with Tar Sands Action Southern California, and then had the 2013 gathering. The goal was really to build a coalition such as what we're doing today, to bring disparate organizations and people together under the umbrella of the climate crisis and solving that climate crisis, and we're still committed to working as a coalition, and you know, we all have a lot of shared values, and with different organizations across the spectrum, and we're talking labor, we're talking youth, we're talking faith, we're talking political and you know, and strict environmental organizations, big green and small green. There are a lot of shared values, and so the goal is to get to the point and to come to solutions. And I feel like we as a community have made a lot of a lot of progress with the Green New Deal, which we're going to get in is the latest version. But, you know, we started off fighting, you know, the oil industry's move with the Keystone XL, which is what brought SoCal 350 together, and also bringing this tar sands into being processed here. But in terms of local issues, LA's an oil town, and the oil industry really controls City Hall still, and the largest urban oil field exists in Los Angeles, and there's two major points to it down in Wilmington, and they're still drilling like crazy in Wilmington, Carson, and this whole area. Drilling rigs are in the backyards, and of course the Inglewood oil field is another massive point where you know, where this drilling's happening, and it's not just this legacy concept, it's this enhanced drilling techniques, which has many different layers to it. Some of it is hydraulic fracturing, which gets a lot of press as fracking, and is destroying, you know, all sorts of resources, using massive amounts of water, using high pressure, using a lot of energy, industrializing landscapes. But more common in Los Angeles area is acidization, and so using chemicals, some of the most caustic on earth, hydrofluoric acid, you know, these type of things that are totally dangerous to neighborhoods. So the key is to stop the drilling that's happening in our neighborhood, stop the importation of these you know, tar sands and these extremely dangerous crudes from far off. Also the Amazon basin, 60% of their oil comes into California to be processed, a main amount in El Segundo here. So the oil industry has, and the 5 major refineries down in the port and harbor area. So we've got the oil industry here, and also what we're using to you know, heat our houses, and so there was a push to ban fracking. Part of the problem with that is, as I said, there's many different technologies that they're using, and the chemicals are secret, and it's hard to get at them, and there's a lot of political power behind that, and it's hard to nail down what's fracking, what's acidization, what's gravel packing. So that didn't work on a statewide basis. Jerry Brown didn't go for banning fracking. SB 4 was the attempt to regulate it, but as we see, it really was allowing a lot of this stuff to happen. So we still have drilling, and we're still addicted to, you know, there was coal, which we're going to get into with Aura, and so how the coal continues and where it stops, she'll talk about. But so I think that our interest is getting rid of these gas plants, as we're talking about here, and how to move past the old fossil fuel way and get into some true renewable energy. Now, we had a lot of statewide legislation. SB 100 is the latest one. And so SB 100 in the end says 50% renewable by 2026, 60% by 2030, and by 100% carbon-free by 2045. Now, carbon-free is not renewable. So the key is there's exceptions to that. We've all seen it as a step in the right direction to get us with this goal of 2045, but as we also know, we're facing this massive, you know, climate destabilization across California and the world. 2045 is way too late, so I think we're going to get into ways that 2035 maybe even 2030 are years that we should be aiming toward to get us off these dirty energy sources, to stop this fossil fuel importation, processing, and of course the drilling in far-off areas and local areas. And so that's kind of what SoCal 350 has been working towards, and you know, bringing us to this one campaign that is really important to making sure that the DWP is moving in the right direction.
I'm Aura Vasquez, and I'm currently a commissioner with the Department of Water and Power. But my story doesn't start here. I think my story starts many, many years ago, even as I was a child, and I saw a science show about the ozone layer, and I became really committed to fight climate change, even without much knowing what it was, maybe at that age. And I found myself maybe about 10 years ago here in LA working for the Sierra Club and organizing with the LA Beyond Coal campaign. So I think I see a lot of familiar faces here from those days, getting LA off of coal. And then we had a different mayor. We had Mayor Villaraigosa, who had expressed that was one of his goals. So it was our job as a campaign to get everyone together and moving towards that direction. So in that process, I met a lot of people. We formed a pretty strong group to get LA off of coal. This isn't a victory of only the Sierra Club. I think this is a victory of all people of Los Angeles, because it took everyone to really make it work. And that's how I I met Mayor Garcetti. And the reason why I personally feel, even though this hasn't been confirmed to me, that I became a commissioner is because of my work on really bringing people together, especially community groups, working with city officials, elected officials, and also bringing solutions that were long-lasting, and also working with an aging Department of Water and Power, our utility, that was, in those days, was pretty reluctant and outdated in their practices and how they saw sustainability and just getting LA to 100%. So as a commissioner now, I have a couple of different duties that I like to focus on, one of them being getting LA to 100% renewables, and we're right now doing a big study on how to make that a reality. I also focus on issues of equity, because for me it's very important that as we figured out the transition to 100% renewables, we figured out a way to make sure that people that are losing jobs are getting a good job, a good paying job. Also that people that have been affected by pollution and by climate change are also the first people that can be benefited by the green, renewable revolution, and that we do move Los Angeles to a really, really what a renewable future is. So, besides that, I want to also make a couple of points. My position is a unique position because I'm one of the first, or if not the first ever organizer activist that has been a commissioner for LADWP. So for me, when I found out that I was going to become a commissioner, and I spoke to, my peers, my friends, I told them that for me this was a big win for the movement, that it wasn't just me, that I was going to need everyone to continue working with me and getting us to where we wanted to be. And the LA 100, or this kind of synergy that we're trying to bring together, is something that has been in our hearts for a really long time. And I think I can look around with different people here, and I think for a long time we've been wanting to see Los Angeles to be more renewable and really powered by the sun, the wind, and renewable sources. So it's exciting to be here, and I think we're going to talk more about what that's like. Today we have a huge opportunity. It's an exciting opportunity that we can turn 3 gas plants into what we want to see, which is part of the renewable energy future, the portfolio that we can have here in Los Angeles. We have a really good board that supports, and we also have a mayor that has taken really big leadership externally and around the country with his initiatives around rallying up other mayors, and had and thought of an activist like myself to be there to maybe bring some of that vision and that lens to the Department of Water and Power. So I think that I'm going to stop there, and I think we're going to have a further discussion. But I just want to say that in November 27th, of last year, I was on a Tuesday morning, I was at the LADWP meeting, on my board meeting, and I heard of the OTC study, which is the one-stroke cooling, where we use marine water to cool down gas plants that are around, the bay in basin and by the ocean. And I learned that we had a couple of scenarios, a couple of choices, in fact, 12, to decide what to do with these gas plants. And it was alarming to me to see that at this meeting, there were 2 people that spoke in the meeting, and they were the business community basically saying, we need reliability, so if you need to power with more gas, please do so. And I was the only one, even then, as we were all trying to digesting what this study was, to say, no, we can't invest ratepayers like you and me money in any more gas or in any more fossil fuel. We need to invest them in renewables and in the future. So I hope that we get to this place together and we can figure out how to move forward, because it's not just these 3 gas plants. Think about all of our infrastructure and how we need to change it to be green and to be renewable. So I'm excited, and thank you for having me here.
Hey everybody, I'm conscious of the fact that I'm probably the least experienced activist on this panel, and I hope you don't mind if I refer to my notes from time to time. I am an organizer with Sunrise. I'm street level. I don't have any official role in the organization. I'm also an organizer with Democratic Socialists of America, Los Angeles. And by day, I work for the Rain Lundquist's campaign to put a climate scientist in City Hall. I am not here in that capacity, but I think that is important. I am a big fan of inside-outside strategies that work with elected and appointed officials and people causing trouble in the streets. I think you need both to get real action done. I call myself a climate justice advocate, not just environmentalist, which I think is an important distinction. And Aura was kind of getting at it earlier. You can't just shut down the coal mines of West Virginia and have no plan for the workers, because then what happens is you end up radicalizing an entire generation of coal miners against not just environmentalism, but all progressive policy. Also, it's just immoral. And that's the distinction between the Green New Deal and traditional liberal environmentalism is the Green New Deal is a jobs proposal as well as an environmental proposal. And that is the future that I want to build. So that's why I make that distinction. To get a Green New Deal, we need action at every level. We need action from neighborhoods, cities, states, nations, and worldwide. I'm doing a lot of work with my neighborhood and with my city. Sunrise has its national agenda right now, which is the Green New Deal resolution. It has something like, when I last checked, 67 co-sponsors, which is really quite impressive, including some people who I wouldn't have expected. And a lot of those are because Sunrise showed up over the last several months with a lot of protests at, with a lot of protests at Congress people's offices, and we made a lot of noise. I organized one at Jimmy Gomez's and one at Adam Schiff's, and both of them have signed on, which is, I think, pretty impressive, because I wouldn't have necessarily expected, I wouldn't have expected some of those names on that list. The goal now for Sunrise over the next month or so is to spend the next week or so making phone calls. So everyone in this room, you can call your reps. There's already and everyone watching, there's already a resolution that's been introduced by Senator Markey and Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez for a nationwide Green New Deal. I understand that it is quite ambitious. There are always things that we could improve about it, but it is a resolution, not a bill. It is a starting point. And I think it is a very good starting point. It is certainly the best climate-related resolution or legislation, I think, to ever be introduced seriously in any House of Congress. So you can make phone calls for that. There are also loads of office visits that are planned for the reps that have not signed on yet. Our senators, Kamala Harris, she has signed on. Dianne Feinstein has not. Actually, I recommend, what's that? Yes, we're very surprised. So I actually recommend calling your reps regardless of whether they have signed on, because they usually only hear from people when people are angry. It can be nice to give them feedback when they're doing something that you like. Yeah, if anyone wants to get involved in office visits, they can come talk to me after. I'm happy to connect them. And then when we get to, so that's the nationwide plan for Sunrise. When we get to local, one of our big initiatives right now is the gas plants thing that Aura was talking about earlier. We do not want the gas plants. Particularly offensive to me about it is that repowering these gas plants would cost $6 billion, according to LADWP's own accounting. LADWP has plans for renewables that would get you the same kind of baseload generating that don't seem to be in serious consideration. I'm sure that Aura knows this issue much better than I do, but I know that at one point LADWP did a study of whether it would be possible to use the Hoover Dam as a giant battery. This is what's called pumped water energy storage. You take water and you pump it up above the dam during the day using solar, and you run it out through the turbines at night. And you can use that to get quite dependable power supply. And their estimate of what that would cost is $3 billion, or half of what restarting these obsolete broken gas plants is. So that's just an example. It doesn't need to be that. There are other proposals too. Batteries are getting cheaper and cheaper, although they do require the mining of lithium. I personally am a big fan of the Hoover Dam thing. But there are solutions that we could come up with. So this requires action at every level. I think one of the big things we're going to be talking about here today is Los Angeles, getting Los Angeles specifically to 100%. And I had something I wanted to say about that, which is 100% carbon neutral electricity for Los Angeles by 2030 would be great. But I actually find that to be inadequate. For several reasons. First off, anytime you engage in the political process, you're going to encounter compromise. I feel like if we ask for 2030, we're going to get 2040. Second off, any goal that we set is aspirational. There are usually, when you set deadlines like this, there aren't necessarily enforcement mechanisms for adhering to those goals. So if we aim for 2030, get 2040, it happens by 2045, we're all dead. More importantly, we are on the, this covers just electricity when we're talking about getting the grid off of dirty energy. Electricity is a big part of carbon emissions, but it is not the only thing. Getting off of dirty electricity still leaves us with carbon-based transit and agriculture. So setting 2030 as our renewable electricity deadline and not taking sufficient action on those other things leaves us, it's just not enough. And when the IPCC report, you guys are all familiar with that, it's a United Nations they aggregated more than 8,000 climate change studies, and that's where all these numbers come for dates. So they're calling for a 50% reduction in global carbon emissions by 2030. That's why you hear 2030 a lot. But if you think But like if you think that's the end of it, I have some bad news, which is that the IPCC report is actually, according to reliable sources who've talked to me, too optimistic. It doesn't take into account certain feedback loops. So that's not the only thing we should be basing these numbers off of either. And the last reason that I would advocate for a date earlier than 2030 is that in Los Angeles, we're supposed to be at the cutting edge of renewables. Now, London just declared climate emergency. They shifted their date from 2050 to 2030. I want you to consider, also, there's a guy running for Seattle City Council, Sean Scott, who has picked the date of 2025. Seattle and London have some of the most cloud cover of any cities anywhere on Earth. Los Angeles does not, with the exception of today. We should not be picking goals that are as ambitious or less ambitious than cloudier cities. And not only like cloud cover, but we are so much further along than these cities already as far as our renewable penetration in the electric grid. So for those reasons, I believe that the date we should pick is 2025 for 100% carbon renewable or carbon neutral electricity. This is the same date picked by the Los Angeles Climate Emergency Mobilization Department when I last checked, and my boss Lorraine Lundquist, who is running for City Council, has picked 2025 as the date as well. She's a sustainability instructor, so I trust her judgment on these things.
I just want to mention that the Climate Emergency Mobilization Department is out of the City Council, and we can thank Andy Schrader, who is Paul Koretz's environmental deputy. He couldn't be here today, but he let me know that that department is up and running and they're working on their recommendations, and we're going to be, we have allies in the city council at least.
Food and Water Watch, for those who aren't aware, we've been around for about 12 years working on a variety of issues related to protecting the human right to water and creating more sustainable food systems. And we got involved in the energy issues that we're talking about today because energy touches on our food and water systems in every way. When we look at the damage that fracking is doing to our drinking water sources, when we look at the impacts of big agricultural dairies now being used in California to generate energy, these are further perpetuating factory farming. These are issues that, energy touches all of these areas. And so I'm happy to be here today to talk a little bit about a report that Food and Water Watch did with Synapse Energy Economics. And we hired Synapse to actually do some in-depth economic modeling of and energy modeling of LA's energy system. And before I get into that, I just want to give people a sense of kind of where things are in LA and kind of where we're going to go. And so right now, LA has about 36 different power plants that exist in various capacities. We get some coal energy from Utah. About a third of the energy in LA comes from oil and gas, and about a tenth of it comes from a nuclear power plant in Arizona. And the rest of the energy source in LA is sun, wind, hydro. And we have a goal right now of getting to 60% by 2030. And what Food and Water Watch found with Synapse in this report is not only is it possible to get to 100% by 2030, but we can do it with no net cost and close to the same amount of renewables that LA is planning on developing now. And we can meet the energy demand of Los Angeles by replacing all that dirty energy with sun and wind. And the key to doing it, though, is actually thinking about using our grid and our energy smarter. And so what we found is that energy efficiency, demand response, and storage are actually the keys to getting LA to 100% renewable. And so when we talk about energy efficiency, that means doing what we're doing more efficiently. That is everything from insulating buildings and changing out light bulbs to using more efficient wires to transport electricity. Then when we talk about demand response, those are policies that where energy will actually go down at certain times when energy demand is very high. So you can get large energy users to agree to turn down their energy usage during peak times. And that helps bring down the overall energy that needs to be produced. And then the final dynamic is storage. And one of the major things we found in this is the major investment for renewables for Los Angeles under our scenarios is in solar. And as we know, solar the sun isn't shining all the time, right? It doesn't shine at night, and days like today it doesn't shine. But we need to build up the significant storage infrastructure in order to capture the energy from the sun, hold on to it, and then use it at these other points in time. And by coupling that storage with demand response and energy efficiency, we actually bring down the cost of transitioning to renewables significantly, because we don't need to actually produce as much storage to bring us up to that peak level of energy need and bring down the overall costs for Los Angeles residents. Now, in our study, we actually looked at two different scenarios. One scenario was a utility scale solar build out, and the other still had utility scale solar but focused much more on demand response, or on distributed solar energy, rooftop solar, solar panels on people's homes, buildings, things like that. And the distributed case actually was far cheaper than the single reliance on utility solar, and was much more affordable for ratepayers in Los Angeles. And one of the other things about the study that I think is very important is looking at how we defined renewable energy. And this is something that's really important, and you started to allude to this a little bit. So when California as a state thinks about renewable energy, we include biofuels in that. We include burning things in that and call it renewable. And we're very concerned with these sorts of emission-based energy sources for a variety of reasons, which we can have a whole nother discussion about. But this plan does this without relying on any biofuels, without relying on any of these so-called, renewable natural gas solutions in our energy mix. It also does so without any carbon pricing mechanisms. So it does so without relying on offsets, planting trees somewhere, without utilizing cap and trade to meet these goals. It is the energy demand is met with energy from the sun and from the wind in the grid, and not these kind of offset programs that exist that have a variety of issues related to impacts on low-income communities and emissions in particular. And I think it's also to point out, and as we talk about strategy, for us, this is a strategic campaign. In LA, we chose to focus on LA, and we chose to do this study in LA because LA has so much influence over the state of California. And so if we can move these policies in LA, both because of the size of the utility, but also the size of the voting base here, we can actually make a substantial change and shift in the California's policies. And also, what happens in California can help move the rest of the country in that direction. And so these, little meetings like this in neighborhoods, we see as the force that's actually going to move and transform the U.S. energy policy. And we need to, over the next 2 years, Congress is going to be having discussions about crafting ideal legislation to move the United States towards renewable energy, and will likely be an electoral issue in 2 years when we're electing a new president and senators and congresspeople, and this will be a major issue. And we can't just let that issue campaign happen. We also have to make tangible results because our timeline is not moving on quickly. So we can do that by moving and transforming Los Angeles and California and making these important issues so that we can start moving forward a plan to move the United States to 100% renewable energy when we have a president in the White House who will not deny the reality of climate scientists are showing us with the need to transition to 100% clean renewable energy. Thank you.
What I would like to do is ask questions, and I've got one right here from the audience, from the viewers, and this is Steve Wolfbrandt. How about getting rid of single-use plastics? And I agree with that because I did a show called Fracking for Plastic. Plastic is a petroleum product, and they are turning, I interviewed Sharon Kelly, who wrote an article for DeSmog blog. They are turning the Rust Belt into the plastics belt. So even though fracking has never been profitable, it's basically been kept alive for 10 years because of zero interest rates, so financial hanky-panky. They're now finding that they cannot make a go of it with fracking for the gas, so now they're fracking. Even Chesapeake Energy is going from gas into oil, and they're using the oil to make plastic. So could this Green New Deal in Los Angeles include what was suggested here by Steve, and I've been advocating for, a ban on single-use plastics, or at least start with plastic water bottles? We all managed to stay hydrated when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s without freaking water bottles, right? Somehow we lived. So who wants to answer that?
Because I remember in my days organizing around getting the plastic bag ban here in LA. We were so close to do so many exciting things until the lobbyists of the plastic industry showed up and basically turned everything around, and it became so that now you go back to, you can go to the supermarket and you can pay, what, 10 cents, 25 cents? I can't remember anymore. It's a very small amount, and they still give you a plastic bag. So these are the things that I think, as we think broader on issues, DWP, elected officials, appointees, I feel like we need to also look at the system as a whole, because I think that unless we have also a systemic change, we're not going to see other changes. But when I became a commissioner, I also signed my resignation letter because we are at the expense of the person appointing us. I was lucky that I think of Garcetti as a forward-thinking mayor, as someone that, again, has gone around the country organizing other mayors on climate change. He has been to the COP. We can continue organizing on issues, but we also need to organize on the core issue, which is changing the system and changing the money in politics. Because as long as some folks have to rely on contributions and donations and PAC money to get elected and to get where we want to be, none of us here are going to be able to ever support or represent our community the way we need to, because we're also going to have to do that fundraising, and we also have to be compromised. And it's tough. It's tough when you want to run a grassroots campaign, and you probably can talk more about this now that you're helping a wonderful elected official get elected. So, and I can tell you this because as a commissioner now, there's some tough decisions that you have to make, and it's not black and white. And I have been called, yeah, you for the environment, you don't care about poor people. Even though I rent, I take the bus, I do things like everybody else does. I was unemployed the majority of last year, as I was leading the largest publicly owned utility in this country.
I used to be a DWP subscriber or customer or whatever. Yeah. And I remember there was an option always to pay more money for renewable or for green, for something green, and I paid it. Where did it go? What was that for?
So we have a lot of incentive programs that we do at DWP as pilot programs. So we have a chunk of funding, for example, to make them work and to test if they can really be successful. And then we take them away. We always talk about an option, and recently talking about the community solar, which is the shared solar program, the solar for renters. Some people have heard of this, which is something that I have been very excited about as a renter myself. We use it so that we can incentivize people, and also as prices go down for renewables, yay! We can also support and contribute a little more now that they're more expensive, on the hope that when they become level with other sources of energy, they can be pricing competitive.
Anytime that you let people opt into renewables but it costs more money, then it becomes a barrier for working class people to participate. And I know that I couldn't personally do 100% renewable through that program for that reason. So as a short-term stopgap, I definitely appreciate the LADWP making it available. I think long-term, what I would love to see is, well, I mean, it would be great if renewable costs less, but even better is if we don't have an option other than renewable. Like, if anytime you put the burden of choosing between renewables and carbon on the consumer, then and renewables cost more. I mean, there have also been studies that show that if you label a light bulb as environmentally friendly, fewer people tend to buy it because they assume it works worse. You instead take the same light bulb and market it as energy saving, then they benefit from it, and they understand that and they buy it. In general, we need to move past an economy where people opt into environmentalism by buying Priuses, and into an economy that just allows everybody to access environmentally conscious energy.
I'm actually in the solar business of installing rooftops as a business, and what's everybody's missing in the transition to green is that the solar business is now a business. And and it's a huge business. There are 65,000 people in California working in the solar business. So there must be 10 or 20,000 in LA. There's two things that have to happen. You have to unionize the solar workers, and you have to organize the solar businesses into a lobby. I don't know why it hasn't happened yet, but the solar lobby and the solar workers, and what we're running into in Diablo Canyon is which we're trying to shut, we have 1,100 guys from the IBEW, and the IBEW kills us every fucking time. Oops, sorry. And whereas if we had a union of the 65,000 solar workers, we would be winning hand over fist. So somebody in LA has to do these two things: organize the solar businesses and organize the solar workers. And one of the things the DWP is doing, you got to reverse this. I had the guys to my house. I'm in the valley. And they told me that I could not put more solar capacity on my rooftop than would cover my electric bill. That's total nonsense. And I told the guy, I'll tell you what, I'm going to put more, and you can arrest my house.
We have one of the biggest, most organized labor union in the country. Our IBEW is enormous. And they have been somewhat now turning the ship around really to embrace more renewables. There's other unions that have also worked with us. NECA, I don't know if you guys know, which is the independent contractors. IBEW, I'm sorry, Local 11 also is another one that they're great. They have a training center. Now, you got to think about the labor movement as a whole. They're not like, like this new sharing economy, for example, that we hear a lot with. Their values and their benefits are a little bit different. And as someone that in the recent, just being a commissioner, I actually have learned this about small businesses and how small businesses have also come to me and say, hey, we have basically lost all of our jobs and our revenue because all it goes to the unions. And it has been for me to step in and say, hey, how can we have a strong labor union, and how can we also support entrepreneurs and small businesses that perhaps don't feel like joining the union? And I think that that's the fine balance. I know that in the past there has been things like the Blue-Green Alliance, which I think is a high-level kind of meet and greet of both groups. The Los Angeles Alliance for a New Economy and the Repower LA coalition, which does exactly that. They're really trying to bring the labor union and the labor movement more towards like the solar companies. But let me tell you, I have lists of things that we do, the policies that we have, that we continue portraying at the department because they don't offer us some benefit. Like, for example, when I asked them, I said, why don't we have solar panels in everybody's home? Let's say they can afford it. We can own them. Let's own them. Let's get the DWP to own all of our everybody's solar panels. So we just basically rent the roof. And one of the things that they said, well, Commissioner, the issue here is that when we do that, we might get generation and we might get benefits for the environment, and maybe some people get some money. I think they can get up to $350 to rent the roof to us, but we don't get any credits, any of the credits that the state gives. So it's basically not profitable to us. And I think that that's so dangerous, because what happens is that now, because of a state policy, we can't really take care of our environment and like pollution and think about people's health. And these are like the policies that I personally, when I see other statewide elected officials talk about, I'm like, are we going to change this behind the meter and in front of the meter little issue that we have? Because this is really not helping, especially for publicly utilities, because we're a little different, we're public. It doesn't really help us get where we want to be.
Two answers to that question. One, in 2006, when An Inconvenient Truth came out, I hosted a screening of that film, and the action item that I had was to have everybody sign a letter to Schwarzenegger for the Million Solar Roofs bill. So we got that bill passed, and we got, I think, 1 million solar roofs. But the problem is, it's still expensive. 20 years ago, when I was remodeling my house, they told me it would cost me, after the rebates, $20,000 for the panels. I was just by Tesla the other day, $20,000 for the panels. That's after the rebate. DWP needs to offer a rebate, just like they gave me $10,000 last year for a solar hot water heater. And what did I do? I saved $40 a month. And I got that not from DWP, sorry, from SoCal Gas. I got a $2,000 rebate when I installed my my electric car charger from DWP. I got another, I don't know how many $1,000 when I got rid of my grass a couple of years ago. So the way to do this is to incentivize people. So obviously the federal incentive is not enough. Now, if the DWP is talking about spending $6 billion on these stupid, gas plants, obviously they have the money to give people the money for the rebates. Now, as far as the Blue-Green Alliance goes, 2013, I think it was, they were having an awards ceremony. They were giving Jerry Brown the Right Stuff Award, when we know that Jerry Brown refused to ban fracking. He was trying to get rid of CEQA, the best environmental law California has. So we organized a protest up there, and he was so scared to be protested, he didn't even show up. In 2013, the same year, we had the LA County Fed, headed by Maria Elena Durazo, with the political director Rusty Hicks, who's now running for state Democratic Party chair, bust in 500 workers to Carson to testify against a fracking moratorium proposal. They were all wearing shirts that said "Jobs for Carson," even though there were only 34 permanent jobs. None of them would go to Carson residents. They would go to people from Texas or North Dakota, and they weren't even unionized jobs. And there was Maria Elena Durazo, who cut her teeth with the farm workers movement, working for the health and safety of farm workers, basically sitting right next to George Milstein, the $1,000 an hour attorney for Latham and Watkins, who was representing Occidental Petroleum. They were sitting there, I have a photograph of it, thick as thieves, killing that fracking moratorium bill that poor community, mostly low-income people of color, were trying to get established because they're so inundated with toxic projects as it is. And then Jerry Brown finished it off making personal calls to all of the council members who were planning to vote for that. And outside, I started to talk to one of the workers that was wearing that shirt. They were all from IBEW and the Teamsters. And I said, why aren't you getting trained in, renewables? That's the future. And they said, oh, we are getting trained in photovoltaics, but we have to protect good-paying jobs wherever they are. And I found out that year that in the refineries, they can make $120,000 a year. A blue-collar worker can make $120,000 a year. Now, I bet you, Harvey, you're not paying your solar workers that. If we are going to pay union wages, it's going to cost us even more. So again, the transition has to include, from the $6 billion, money to pay the workers better.
I feel that movement needs to come from workers too. That's any advances that we've made in the labor movement have come from people who are in labor who say this is enough, and they're not paying workers enough with solar, which is why they can get them all bussed in against the fracking thing or a lot of the other things that we're doing. So and people have said we had solar companies at our marches before, and they go, well, they're not just transition. They're not behind what we're trying to push here. So, so solar can't look at what's been happening with Tesla and how they're not treating their employees right. It's typical ways of treating employees right in the corporate scheme that we've got. It goes back to changing the system, but it also means that the movement that we have is, okay, we're not going to form a labor union of these people here, but we need workers next to us and for us to work together. And I think that's something we're trying to get better at. And I think the Green New Deal is pushing from the outside for job guarantees, for a more specific way of doing it, which will put pressure from the outside, but there's an inside movement to have labor step up.
There are two policies that I think we can implement that would help to create a stronger unionized workforce. One is card check. Card check is a policy where if half the number of people in a workplace sign a card, they then have their union has to be recognized and negotiate a contract with the boss. Right now, it's a very unfriendly environment for organizing new labor unions. The second policy is making sure that any projects that are done with public money have project labor agreements and pay prevailing wage. these sorts of things will make sure that even non-unionized workers are paid a living fair wage. That is the wage that is negotiated by union workers in that same field.
Right now, the city has a policy for any city workers where they can work from home if their managers deign to give them the privilege. That program was conceived specifically on environmental grounds. I don't think that in 2019 there's any reason that work from home for people who do most of their work on the computer shouldn't be an entitlement like sick days and vacation days that people just expect as part of their packages. I think the city has tremendous leverage, and DWP has tremendous leverage, and if they said we will only contract with union shops, that all of a sudden we would see a lot more union shops. So although the city can't force everybody to unionize, there is leverage, and I would love to see them start wielding that power.
One of the big questions is why or whether or not this Renewable 100 campaign for LA recognizes that LA is just one of 88 cities in LA County. It has only half of the population, and that a full 5 million other people are now eligible for the largest renewable energy program in the country through CCA. There's a lot of leverage there. DWP should be working hand in hand to procure distributed energy resources. And that's not just power, but that's backup. That's, as you mentioned, demand response. Electric cars are going to be a huge part of this because they all have batteries in them that we can store energy and transmit. But the question about unions is a simple one. The same union that I argued with in Carson, who showed up in busloads to fight fracking, is the union that then hired me to be their climate consultant at $10,000 a month. I brought union members who I first had credibility with to get me in. And the truth is that in our modern 100% renewable world, the electrician is king. Everything has to be wired, and it's not just solar panels. Solar panel jobs are called derisively by those in the union panel slapper jobs, and they're crappy jobs, as you know. The first thing you want to do is move up out of that job of being an installer on the roof. The smart guy's wiring down up in the inverter, and the real smart guy's planning the system in an office somewhere. But the truth is, enlightened self-interest is the key to working with the unions, and they're not going to be environmentally swayed, and they're not going to be emotionally or ethically or morally swayed. The only way you can sway them is to tell them, if you're a refinery worker getting $100,000 a year with Cadillac benefits now, you're going to get that same job in our new economy, because otherwise they have zero motivation to join us, and they will not look ahead 10 years from now when CO2 is 450 parts per million. They're looking at paying their rent, sending their kids to school, buying their next Christmas gift, and that is the reality of the unions. Do not trust them, but we are required to work with them. We either partner with them or we don't win.
So we had worked very closely with Tulsi Gabbard's office in writing a piece of legislation called the OFF Act. If you look at that legislation, it actually provides some really good ideas about how we can help support a just and equitable transition of the workforce. And it does have an idea of creating an agency within the Department of Labor that's specifically focused on building the renewable energy workforce that we need to transition to renewable energy. It also has provisions that will offer programs like early retirement for people in oil and gas and coal jobs who are near retirement, and retraining isn't an option. It will provide wage replacements for workers in these fields while they are trained, and providing actual training resources to provide to help workers make those transitions, as well as relocation assistance for people who need to move and things like that. And the Green New Deal actually is providing some of those things too, in terms of housing and healthcare are even talked about in this. And the reason they're talked about in the Green New Deal is, is because in order to really participate in the new green economy, you need to have access to health care. If you have a job where you have health benefits and you're in this place, and you won't be able to move very easily without some sort of access to housing and health care in the new place where these jobs are being created, right? So as you're in West Virginia and you have benefits and this coal plant goes down, by providing health and housing benefits and make sure everybody has access to these things, we can actually make sure that everyone is able to participate in these things. And in society now, we've moved very through trade agreements and other things where capital is able to move around very quickly and easily, but the workforce isn't. And so these sorts of policies actually help create more mobility in the workforce that will give people access to better paying jobs and better quality of life.
Tulsi is running for president. I don't know if she's going to reintroduce that, but what we did have is two of our very, very, very local Congress members, Ted Lieu and Jimmy Gomez, just introduced a bill. And like Tulsi's, it's supposed to be 100% clean energy by 2030. But the difference, or is it 2035? But the difference is theirs gets off of greenhouse gases by 2050, which is too late. And I think Tulsi's gets off of greenhouse gases by 2037. So what do you guys think that we have two Congress members who are right here who have introduced legislation? Do you think they can be helpful with getting Los Angeles to our Green New Deal?
Well, we met with Jimmy Gomez's staff this week just before the resolution for the Green New Deal came out, and they didn't give us much to go on. The important thing is that we, as a community, as a coalition of groups and people, are there to remind them of this need. Because I think Jimmy Gomez is the type of politician who, like our Mayor Garcetti, needs the public to demand these things. That it requires showing up, writing letters, being present, and making our voices heard.
Jimmy Gomez has a really good track record on working when he was here in the state legislature, working around EJ issues, environmental justice issues. In my experience working with other elected officials and other capacities, I mean, at the state level, federal level, to the local level, is exactly what you mentioned, Jack, which is kind of hard for a Congress member or such, or even an assembly member to come and say, hey, Mayor Garcetti, or hey, DWP, can you do this? Because then you go and play into this whole chain of command, which I have also learned that I didn't know about the chain of command. But one of the things that I wanna mention, and I wanna just kind of put it out there in terms of personalities. I got to work with Mayor Villaraigosa, for good, bad, or ugly. I got to work with him, and he had a very different personality than Mayor Garcetti. He was somewhat very strong on his views. He will come out very soon to say what he wanted to say. Some people criticize him, and some people love him because he was that way. Because he would say, we're going to do this, and he maybe didn't have the plan, but he would say, but we're going to do it. So it really got a lot of people like excited. Like I can attest because my campaign, a big win was because he was that way. So definitely. Mayor Garcetti is a little different. And Mayor Garcetti likes to have the facts. He likes to have the data. He likes to have the players in place. He wants to make sure that when he says something, it's kind of solid on rock, and that he can really back it up and not like say later, oh, well, maybe now it's just half the way. It's not all the way, which we see in a lot of elected officials. Sometimes they do that. They kind of promise you something very general, and then in the details, everything kind of gets lost. So, and I have learned also how to appreciate that as also as a commissioner, and learning about reliability and why we don't do more distributed generation, for example, which I totally believe we should. But you know, what are the other details? So I couldn't agree more in the pressure to the bureaucratic process from the community. Now, one of the things that I would like to see from all the elected officials out there, not just some, but all, is a lot more collaboration with community groups like us and with people like us. We're here as an asset. I learned in my community organizing training, I learned that the answers come out from the community. We have a lot of the answers. We have a lot of the solutions. That's the grassroots kind of model that I like know and I have learned. And I continue seeing this as a failure from a lot of electeds, where they really go out there in isolation. They work on bills, they work on resolutions, they work on different things, and then they come out and say, this is what we're going to do. And everybody say, wait a minute, we've been working on that for a long time, and we've been asking you to do this. And it feels almost a little bit insulting that we don't really know that this is what you were going to do. So I think this is my cry to whoever is watching out there. And in general, if you are a person in a leadership position, to work with your community. I think that we own our people that much. And I think the new paradigm of politics, we see this with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, more transparency, more accessibility, more touch with the people that you're really impacting with your policy.
It is very important that we all get involved, everyone in Los Angeles get involved in this campaign, LA 100, for a Green New Deal for Los Angeles. Thank you, and keep fighting.